inch or something like that on there. So I'll go ahead and I'll grab my Park Y wrench and loosen this. At the same time, I'm going to go ahead and hold with the needle nose pliers, loosen that up a little bit, tighten it down, and go from there, which looks pretty good. I'll go ahead and I'll just cinch this down, make sure that it's not going to loosen or slip or anything like that. These excess cables, I like to kind of bend downward so they're out of the way. If the cable is frayed or anything like that, I might cut it clean and then put a cable crimp on the end just to keep it from poking the rider on your leg or something like that when you come by or anything. But this looks pretty good. The brake shoes should hit flat on the rim, and for the most part, the front part of the brake shoe should hit the rim first, and that's called toe wear. A lot of times that will prevent brake squealing, especially on cantilever brakes. They're very susceptible to squealing when things aren't just perfectly aligned up and towed in. But this one looks pretty good, and we can do a test ride and see if we can get any squealing or anything like that. Condition of the pad, these are a little bit hard. It'll make it a little bit harder to brake. I expect you could replace the brake pads probably every couple of years. A little bit softer compound, give you a little bit better braking on there. But for the most part, I'll go ahead and I'll leave these on here for the time being. There's plenty of pad on there. So, yeah, so it should work through the season. For the front brake, the procedure is exactly the same. Take off the front wheel, check the hub bearings, check the smoke tension, true up the wheel if needed, and then reinstall. One thing we can also do is we can check the tire pressure. And of course, it's pretty straightforward. Not that complicated. A lot of people have tire gauges you can use. If you have a higher pressure tire gauge, auto pencil gauge, you can use that. I've got a Park inflator tool here that I can put on here and bring it up to 40 to 50 psi. I suppose I could go up to about 60 if you're going to be running on dry pavement. I wouldn't go too high on these, and of course the psi is normally stamped on the side of the tire. Okay, so that looks good there. And we can go ahead and adjust the, check the adjustment on the derailleurs front and rear. So we'll start off just pedaling, clicking it one click at a time. Like that. It looks like it gets all gears. And this is 7 speeds, so we have 7 clicks that it goes into, and it seems to be working very well. One thing I like to do is I like to force the derailleur up without shifting it, checking the limit screw on the rear derailleur, because the last thing you want to do is overshift onto the rear, past the spoke protector and potentially into the spokes, which could rip the rear derailleur right off if it's not adjusted correctly. Limit screws do exactly that. They limit how far the derailleur goes in and how far the derailleur goes out. So the opposite is true. You want to sometimes check the outside limit screw, make sure that it's not overshifting that last cog and dropping between that cog and the bike frame itself. This one looks pretty good. And the small cog, usually you should have very little, if any, play on the cable itself. If you do want to make minor adjustments, you can always do that by adjusting this barrel adjuster on the rear here. By unscrewing this out, we'll tighten the cable. Screwing it in will give a little bit more slack on the shift cable. We'll go ahead and we'll check the front derailleur and see how that's shifting. And This has, it's a triple chainring, so it's got 3 positions here on the front. And it is shifting in each gear, which is good. But one thing I do notice is that the alignment on the front derailleur cage is actually off a little bit. It's turned inward a little bit. So when you're going through, when you're cross chaining like this, you're going to get a little bit of drag, even though you can kind of trim this a little bit sometimes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen this 9mm bolt on the other side and just swing the derailleur out just a little bit. Doesn't take much. But I'll grab my 9mm. I'll bring this up here. Loosen this. And just rotate it just a little bit. Doesn't take much. One thing I notice is that this derailleur cage is actually binding on the derailleur clamp itself. So I got to loosen this. It's a little bit unusual. Okay, so I'm going to loosen this cage a little bit so I can rotate that cage, this derailleur cage outward just a little bit. There it goes. There we go. So primarily what you want to do is you want to have the derailleur cage pretty much on an even plane with the large chainring, and that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and cinch this down. And you want to make sure that the derailleur is not too high or too low. Otherwise that could cause some chain derailment. Sometimes if they're too high they'll fall off. If they're too low, sometimes the inner cage will hit the middle ring. So you want to have probably a couple millimeters on the bottom of the derailleur cage over the top teeth there. Should be pretty good. And that looks pretty good. Now, of course, since I swung this derailleur cage out just a little bit, I need to reset my limit screw, and I can do that by opening. Let's see, which one is this here? There we go, the inside limit screw here. I just open that up so it's not dragging and it's not swinging the derailleur cage too far inward, which could cause the chain to drop off the small chainring onto the bottom bracket, which you definitely don't want. So check it in cross-chaining positions. Go ahead and put it on big to big, see how that looks. Run the opposite direction. And small to small. It runs pretty good. So I would say this one's actually in pretty good shape here. Certainly you can spray lube the derailleurs front and rear a little bit, making sure that you're keeping it away from the rim or the brake pads or anything like that, and then also oiling the chain if it needs a little bit of lubrication there. The other thing I like to do or check, of course, is the crankset itself. Sometimes these will come loose under pressure, so I'll go ahead and I'll see if I can find my wrench to tighten that down. So it's an 8mm hex key. Put that in there and just tighten that down like that. Push that down right there, and it looks good. Pedal wrenches, you can either take a pedal wrench and check and make sure the pedals are tight. Last thing you want is a pedal to come off the crank arm. just check that. They don't have to be super tight, but they need to be snug. All right, and then just kind of walking around. Oh, I need to tighten the cage back up before I forget. There we go, that looks good.